Hey there, Wastelanders! Welcome back to another deep dive into Fallout lore that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about the Great War. Today we're exploring one of the most disturbing theories in the Fallout universe. What if the Zetans never left Earth after their centuries of abductions? What if they were still watching on October 23rd, 2077? Let's begin this dark journey into the truth about alien occupation and humanity's unwitting role as eternal test subjects. They told me I was crazy. The doctors at the Vault, the scribes at the Citadel, even the Brotherhood elders who've seen things that would break most Wastelanders. But I'm not crazy. I know what I saw up there. I know what they've been doing to us for centuries. And I know the truth about October 23, 2077. My name is Marcus Reeves, though the Zetans cataloged me as Specimen 2281-H. I spent 3 months aboard Mothership Zeta before I escaped, and what I discovered up there changes everything we thought we knew about the Great War, about humanity's self-destruction, about whether we were ever truly in control of our own fate. The wasteland you're walking through right now, the radiation still cooking the ground 200 years later, the mutated horrors stalking the ruins, none of it was an accident. It was all part of their experiment. I need to start at the beginning, back when I still thought the blinding blue light outside Springvale was just another hallucination from too much jet. The beam hit me so fast, I didn't even have time to reach for my plasma rifle. 1 second, I was scavenging pre-war tech from a rusted-out Corvega. The next, I was floating upward, my body frozen, watching the capital wasteland shrink beneath me like someone was pulling me up to heaven on invisible strings. Except this wasn't heaven. Heaven doesn't smell like ozone and copper. Heaven doesn't have steel walls and aliens with eyes like black marbles staring at you while they strap you to a table. When I woke up in the holding cell, I wasn't alone. There was a woman named Soma, a scavenger from somewhere she called the Wasteland, though not our wasteland. She spoke with an accent I'd never heard before and carried tech I couldn't identify. She'd been aboard the ship for weeks, maybe months. Time loses all meaning when you're trapped in a metal box orbiting Earth. She told me the aliens had taken hundreds of people over the centuries, thousands maybe. She'd seen the cryo chambers, rows and rows of frozen humans stretching back through history like a library of specimens. That's when I met Sally, a little girl, couldn't have been more than 10 years old, wearing a Vault jumpsuit so old it predated the Great War by months. She'd been taken in late 2077, just weeks before the bombs fell. She'd been up here for 2 centuries, kept alive by alien technology, watching the Earth burn from orbit. Sally knew the ship better than the aliens did. She'd learned to hack their systems, to understand their language through pattern recognition, to move through the ventilation shafts like a ghost. She was our guide, our translator, our only hope of getting off that ship alive. We fought our way through the medical bay, past aliens wielding energy weapons that could disintegrate a human being in seconds. We killed dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Their blood was this sickly green color like antifreeze mixed with bile, and it smelled worse than a glowing one's corpse rotting in the sun. But we kept moving, kept fighting because Sally said there were others, other humans trapped in cryosleep, and we needed numbers if we were going to survive. That's when we found them. The engineering core had 4 cryopods that still showed active life signs. Sally ran a diagnostic, her small fingers dancing over alien controls like she'd been doing this her whole life, which I guess she had. The pods hissed open one by one, releasing clouds of freezing vapor that turned my breath to ice crystals. The first pod contained a man in pre-war military fatigues, winterized combat armor from Anchorage. His name was Elliott Tercorien, private in the United States Army, serial number 3477809. He'd been a medic with the 108th Infantry Battalion, taken by the aliens during the Battle of Anchorage. When Soma told him about the Great War, about how the bombs had fallen, about how civilization had ended while he was frozen, I watched this grown man's face just crumble. 200 years of his life, gone in an instant. Everyone he'd ever known, dead before he even got the chance to say goodbye. The second pod held a cowboy. Not someone dressed like a cowboy, an actual Wild West frontier cowboy named Paulson. He wore leather chaps and a battered hat, carried a revolver that looked like it belonged in a museum. He'd been taken with his family sometime in the 1800s, torn from his wife and son by a blue beam of light he thought was God's judgment. The aliens had tortured his family while he watched through a viewport, conducting experiments he refused to describe. When he woke up and realized how much time had passed, how long he'd been a prisoner, he didn't cry like Elliott. He just got quiet, the kind of quiet that comes before someone decides to start killing and not stop until they're dead. The third pod opened to reveal a man in armor I'd never seen before, ornate metal plates decorated with a crest, a sword at his side that belonged in the ancient world. Toshiro Kago, a samurai from feudal Japan taken during the Tokugawa shogunate sometime between 1568 and 1603. He didn't speak English. Sally tried to communicate with him through gestures, but all he wanted was his sword. The aliens had taken it, cataloged it, stored it somewhere in their vast collection of human artifacts. He'd spent over 400 years in that pod, frozen in time, and the only thing he cared about was getting his weapon back. The fourth pod contained a dead astronaut. Colonel Hartigan, United States Space Administration, abducted during the 1960s space race. His capsule, Clarabella 7, had vanished during a routine orbital mission, sparking decades of conspiracy theories about alien abductions and government cover-ups. Turns out, the conspiracy theorists were right. The aliens had taken him, studied him, kept him alive for over a century before his body finally gave out. Sally said the cryopod's life support had failed sometime in the 2050s. He'd been dead for 20 years, but the aliens never bothered to dispose of the body. They just left him there, another specimen in their collection. Looking at these people, these survivors from different centuries all trapped in the same nightmare, something clicked in my mind. The Zetans hadn't just been visiting Earth randomly, they'd been conducting a longitudinal study of human civilization, taking samples from each major era, documenting our technological progress, our cultural evolution, our capacity for violence. The samurai represented feudal warfare, the cowboy represented frontier expansion, the astronaut represented our first attempts to escape our planet, Elliott represented modern industrial warfare, and Sally represented the atomic age. We were all data points in an experiment that had been running for over 400 years. Sally led us deeper into the ship, through corridors that twisted and branched like the intestines of some massive metal creature. She showed us the cargo holds, massive chambers filled with artifacts from Earth. I saw a Roman chariot next to a pre-war Chrysalis highwayman. I saw medieval armor stored beside power armor from the Anchorage reclamation. I saw paintings, sculptures, weapons, clothing, all of it cataloged and preserved like a museum of human history. But this wasn't a museum, it was a morgue. Each artifact represented someone who'd been taken, studied, and probably killed. In one cargo hold, I found something that made my blood run cold, a terminal with data logs in English, translated by Sally's hacking. Research notes from the aliens, documenting their observations of Earth. They'd been monitoring every major human conflict for centuries. The Crusades, the Napoleonic Wars, World War I, World War II, the Resource Wars, the Sino-American War, every single one documented in meticulous detail, complete with abduction records, genetic samples, weapons schematics. But what terrified me wasn't that they'd been watching us kill each other for centuries. It was what they'd been doing with that information. The logs showed extensive analysis of human weapons development, particularly nuclear technology. They'd abducted scientists from the Manhattan Project. They'd taken military personnel with knowledge of ICBM launch codes. They'd studied the effects of radiation on human tissue decades before the bombs fell. It was like they were preparing for something, learning how to operate in a post-nuclear world. And then I found the entry dated October 22nd, 2077, the day before the Great War. Mothership Zeta had moved into position directly above North America, maintaining a geosynchronous orbit over Washington, D.C. The death ray, their primary weapon capable of scorching continents from orbital altitude, had been fully charged and aimed at strategic targets across the United States. The log listed coordinates for military installations, power plants, research facilities, places that would be critical in any nuclear exchange. If you're still with me after hearing this, hit that like and subscribe button because what I'm about to tell you gets worse. So much worse. If you discovered aliens had been abducting humans for centuries, which historical period would terrify you most to learn they'd been studying? Ancient Rome, the World Wars, or something even earlier? I stood in that cargo hold staring at those coordinates on the alien terminal, and my hands started shaking, not from fear, though there was plenty of that, from rage, because I was starting to understand what had really happened on October 23, 2077, the death ray. Sally had mentioned it before, but I hadn't truly understood its significance until I saw the weapon with my own eyes. We fought our way through waves of aliens to reach the Death Ray Control Center, a massive chamber with a transparent floor showing the weapon itself suspended beneath us. It looked like a cannon the size of a building, crackling with energy that made my teeth ache even through the shielding. The weapon could fire beams of concentrated energy powerful enough to simulate a nuclear explosion from orbit. I'm talking about a weapon that could level entire cities, create craters miles wide, incinerate everything in its path. And the Zetans had positioned it directly above Earth on the exact morning the world ended. Sally helped me access the firing logs. My God, the firing logs! The weapon had been activated 17 times during the Great War. 17 separate shots fired at Earth between 9:26 and 11:42 Eastern Standard Time on October 23. The coordinates matched locations that official pre-war records listed as nuclear impact sites: the Columbia River Valley, Southern California, parts of Texas, areas that supposedly had been hit by Chinese missiles. But what if some of those strikes hadn't been nuclear weapons at all? What if the Zetans had used the chaos of the nuclear exchange to fire their own weapon, to test its effectiveness, to ensure certain strategic locations were completely sterilized? I pulled up satellite imagery the aliens had captured during the Great War, stored in their databases like someone's saving vacation photos. I watched the world end from orbit. First American submarine launched missiles appeared off the California coast at 0003 hours Eastern. Then, Chinese bombers crossed the Bering Strait at 0337. The Integrated Operational Nuclear Detection System registered the first 4 missile launches at 0913. By 0926, the president had ordered a full retaliatory strike under scenario Mike X-Charlie, November 91. The missiles flew, the bombs fell, and 2 hours later, the world was dead. But Mothership Zeta had been there the whole time, watching, recording, and if the firing logs were accurate, participating. They'd used humanity's self-destruction as cover to conduct their own weapons tests. We'd given them the perfect laboratory, a planet-wide nuclear holocaust where a few extra explosions wouldn't even be noticed. Elliott found me in the death ray control room, staring at those logs like they might somehow rearrange themselves into something less horrifying. He'd been exploring other parts of the ship, cataloging what the aliens had been doing to their captives. What he told me made the death ray seem almost merciful by comparison. The experimentation labs, 3 massive chambers filled with medical equipment that belonged in a nightmare. Elliott recognized some of the tech, said it was similar to equipment he'd used during his training in cryoscience, except the alien versions were centuries more advanced. They'd been studying human biology in ways that made pre-war, mad scientists look like country doctors. Radiation resistance testing, genetic modification, forced evolutionary acceleration. They'd been exposing captives to controlled doses of radiation and documenting the mutation patterns, running these experiments years before the bombs actually fell. Like, they knew the nuclear holocaust was coming and wanted to understand how humans would adapt to the wasteland. I found audio logs from the captives, recordings the aliens forced people to make before putting them into cryo-sleep. 25 total recordings scattered throughout the ship. Some were heartbreaking, people terrified and confused, begging for help that would never come. But others were informative. One recording was from a man named Andrew Endicott, taken from Salem Village in 1697. He'd seen the inside of the ship, seen humans from different time periods all frozen in pods. He described them as being from different eras, wearing strange dress, like the aliens had been collecting samples throughout history. Another recording was from a college student abducted in August 2041. She'd figured out that the aliens were cataloging humans like library books, creating their own collection of specimens before putting them into suspended animation. But the most disturbing recording came from someone who'd managed to escape their cell and access alien systems. This person had decoded enough of the Zetan language to understand what they wanted. The recording said the aliens planned to take hundreds, maybe thousands of humans and change them into some kind of abomination. Many had already been killed in experiments. The recording ended with the person saying they were being hunted, that they had to keep moving, that someone needed to send help. Nobody ever sent help. Nobody even knew help was needed. Paulson discovered something in the biological research area that explained what those abominations might be. Humans who'd been subjected to forced evolutionary virus experiments, their bodies twisted and mutated into creatures that barely resembled their original form. The aliens had been testing FEV on human subjects decades before Vault Tec officially created it. Or maybe Vault Tec hadn't created it at all. Maybe they'd reverse engineered it from alien samples. The timeline fit too perfectly to be coincidence. The United States government had been developing the forced evolutionary virus as a biological weapon starting in the 2050s. The Zetans had been conducting similar experiments for centuries. Someone had made contact, someone had shared technology. That's when I remembered Quaere Verum, a pre-war conspiracy group considered crackpots by everyone who knew about them, dedicated to exposing what they called the conspiracy. They believed the government was covering up alien contact, that exotic weapons like plasma technology had been reverse engineered from extraterrestrial sources. In 2063, they'd stolen a prototype plasma pistol from a classified government facility, an MPLX Nova Surge, trying to prove their theories. The government had systematically killed every member of the group within weeks. The official story said they were domestic terrorists, but I'd found the Nova Surge aboard Mothership Zeta, locked in a cargo hold along with the bodies of 3 men whose identification matched Quaere Verum member profiles. The aliens had taken them, or maybe the government had handed them over. Either way, people who got too close to the truth about alien contact tended to disappear. The Enclave, the shadow government that survived the Great War on an oil rig off the coast of California. They'd known about the aliens before the bombs fell, had been covering up evidence of extraterrestrial contact for decades. Conspiracy theorists had accused the Enclave of basing their advanced technology on reverse-engineered alien designs. Their plasma weapons, their power armor, their robotics, all supposedly influenced by Zetan technology. I'd dismissed it as wasteland paranoia before. Now, I was starting to think the paranoid ones had been the only sane people left. Toshiro had found his sword in the waste disposal area, a katana over 400 years old, still sharp enough to cut through alien armor like it was paper. Watching him fight with that blade, seeing the aliens fall before someone who represented humanity's capacity for violence in its purest form, I understood why they'd been studying us. We were the most successful predator species on our planet. We'd developed from primitive hunters to nuclear-capable civilization in less than 10,000 years. We'd created art and music and literature, yes, but we'd also created increasingly efficient ways to kill each other. Every generation found new methods of warfare, new weapons, new strategies for destruction. We were fascinating and terrifying in equal measure, and the Zetans wanted to know what would happen if you pushed that predatory instinct to its absolute limit. What would happen if you gave an aggressive species nuclear weapons and then sat back to watch them use those weapons on themselves? Would they survive? Would they adapt? Would the wasteland create something even more dangerous than the civilization that had existed before? Sally showed me the abduction patterns, data she'd extracted from alien archives over her 2 centuries aboard the ship. The rate of human abductions had been relatively steady for 400 years, maybe a few dozen per decade, just enough to maintain their sample collection. But in the 2070s, the decade before the Great War, abductions had increased dramatically. Hundreds of humans taken in the years immediately before October 23. Like the Zetans were preserving specimens before a predicted extinction event. Like they knew the bombs were coming and wanted to save representatives from the civilization that was about to end. How did they know? That was the question that kept gnawing at me. How could the aliens have known with such certainty that humanity would destroy itself in 2077? Unless they'd been pushing us toward that conclusion all along, small nudges throughout history, technological inspirations here, strategic assassinations there, maybe even direct manipulation of key political figures. What if the resource wars hadn't been a natural consequence of peak oil? What if the Sino-American conflict had been deliberately engineered? What if every step toward nuclear annihilation had been guided by an extraterrestrial intelligence studying the limits of human self-destruction? I found evidence in the research labs, archived communications between the Zetans and something else, another faction. The language was heavily encoded, but Sally managed to decrypt fragments, references to the surface cooperation and the prepared ones, and maintaining the timeline. It read like the Zetans had been coordinating with someone on Earth, someone who knew about the alien presence and was actively helping them achieve their goals. The Enclave seemed like the obvious candidate. A shadow government preparing for nuclear war decades in advance, building vaults supposedly to save humanity but actually conducting twisted social experiments. Vault Tec running cruel tests on vault dwellers that mirrored the kind of research the Zetans were conducting. The parallels were too numerous to ignore. Vault 13, where a man would eventually emerge and become the vault dweller who saved the wasteland from the Master's army. Vault 101, where I'd grown up before the Overseer's tyranny drove me into the capital wasteland. Vault 112, where the Overseer had run simulation after simulation testing human responses to authority. Every vault was a controlled experiment in human behavior under extreme stress. Just like every human aboard Mothership, Zeta was a controlled experiment in survival and adaptation. Elliott had been examining the alien medical equipment, trying to understand what they'd learned from centuries of human vivisection. He found logs indicating the Zetans had perfected techniques for extracting specific memories from human brains, for isolating the neurological patterns associated with aggression, fear, creativity, love. They could download a person's entire consciousness and store it in their databases. Death didn't mean the end of observation. It just meant transferring the data to a more permanent archive. I wondered how many of the frozen humans in the cryochambers were actually still alive, and how many were just empty shells with their minds already uploaded to alien servers. I wondered if the Zetans even distinguished between the two states. To them, we were just information waiting to be cataloged. Whether that information resided in a living brain or a computer drive probably didn't matter. Soma found a map in the navigation systems showing Zetan bases across pre-war Earth, not crash sites or temporary research outposts, but permanent installations built into the planet's crust. Area 51 in Nevada, obviously, Roswell in New Mexico, but also sites under major cities, hidden in mountain ranges, buried in the ocean trenches. Dozens of facilities humanity had thought were our own research centers, our own military bases, our own secret projects. The Zetans had been embedded in human civilization for centuries, operating in the shadows, influencing our development like farmers tending crops. That's what we were to them. Crops, agriculture. They'd seeded our planet with themselves 400 years ago, maybe longer, and they'd been carefully managing our growth ever since. Pruning here, fertilizing there, creating the perfect conditions for us to develop in exactly the way they wanted. And when we finally reached the point of nuclear capability, when we'd grown dangerous enough to be interesting, they triggered the harvest. The Great War hadn't been humanity's failure, it had been the Zetans' success. If this story has kept you listening this far, and you want more of these dark confessions from the wasteland, hit that like button. It really motivates me to create similar Fallout lores. If you learned that an alien species had been manipulating human history for centuries, would you rather know the full truth and live in despair, or remain ignorant and die? Believing we destroyed ourselves? We fought our way to the bridge, through corridors filled with aliens who seemed increasingly desperate to stop us. They weren't just defending their ship anymore, they were protecting their secrets. Sally managed to hack into the ship's main computer core during a brief lull in the fighting, downloading as much data as she could store on a salvaged holotape. What she found in those files confirmed my worst fears and introduced new ones I hadn't even considered. The Zetans had a name for Earth in their language. Sally translated it as the Garden of Accelerated Evolution. Not Earth, not Terra, a garden, a place where they grew things, and what they'd been growing was us, specifically our capacity for self-destruction. Every major war in human history had been monitored, analyzed, and in some cases, deliberately initiated. The data showed Zetan agents had infiltrated human society at key moments, posing as advisors, scientists, religious figures, anyone who could influence the course of civilization. The Black Death in the 1400s, Zetan biological warfare testing, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand that triggered World War I. A Zetan operative had been in Sarajevo that day, ensuring Gavrilo Princip was in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. The development of nuclear fission? Zetan scientists had leaked critical research to both the Americans and the Soviets during the Manhattan Project, ensuring both sides would develop atomic weapons simultaneously. They'd been cultivating mutually assured destruction for decades, watering the seeds of nuclear proliferation until they finally bore fruit on October 23, 2077. But here's what made my stomach turn. The data showed the Zetans hadn't just observed the Great War, they'd actively participated in ensuring it happened. In October 2077, the Chinese forces in Alaska had been on the verge of surrender. The American liberation of Anchorage should have led to peace negotiations, not nuclear annihilation. Both sides were exhausted, their resources depleted, their populations demanding an end to the conflict. The war should have ended with a treaty, not with 2 hours of nuclear fire. Except someone had fed false intelligence to both governments. Someone had convinced the Chinese that the Americans were planning a massive biological weapons attack using FEV. Someone had convinced the Americans that Chinese submarines off the California coast were preparing to launch a first strike. The data showed Zetan operatives embedded in both military command structures, sending fabricated reports, altering communications, creating the perfect storm of paranoia and miscommunication that would inevitably lead to someone pushing the button. At 0913 Eastern Standard Time on October 23, when the Integrated Operational Nuclear Detection System detected the first missile launches, those missiles were real. Chinese submarines had actually fired, but they'd fired because their command believed American bioweapons were already being deployed in mainland China. The intelligence was false. The Zetans had manufactured it, and when the American president ordered a retaliatory strike at 0926, he was responding to a threat that had been deliberately engineered by an alien species conducting the largest psychology experiment in human history. The Zetans wanted to know what would happen when you gave an intelligent species the tools to destroy itself and then pushed it toward that precipice. Would they step back? Would they find another solution? Or would they jump? Humanity jumped. We'd passed their test, except passing meant failing in every way that mattered. Elliott was going through the alien medical databases, looking for any reference to his squad members. What he found destroyed him. The Zetans had taken his entire unit from Anchorage, all 6 medics. They'd kept Elliott in stasis because his psychological profile showed adaptability and usefulness. But the others, Daniels and Beckett and the rest, they'd been used for experimentation, radiation exposure studies, forced mutation protocols, pain tolerance measurements. The aliens had tortured them for information about human military capabilities, about nuclear weapon deployment strategies, about ICBM launch codes and failsafe procedures. The logs showed the Zetans had extracted complete knowledge of American nuclear command and control systems from captured military personnel years before the Great War. They knew exactly how the Americans would respond to a perceived first strike. They knew the protocols, the decision trees, the automated systems that would trigger once certain thresholds were crossed. They'd studied human nuclear doctrine the way a chess player studies their opponent's strategy. And when the moment came, they'd exploited every weakness, every gap, every point of failure in our systems designed to prevent exactly the catastrophe they were trying to cause. Toshiro discovered something in the armory that suggested the Zetans' interest in humanity went back even further than the 1600s. Weapons dating to ancient civilizations, a Roman gladius, a Bronze Age spear, stone tools from the Paleolithic era. The aliens had been visiting Earth for thousands of years, possibly since the dawn of human civilization. Every major technological leap in our history, fire, agriculture, metallurgy, chemistry, nuclear physics, all of it had occurred while the Zetans were watching. Maybe more than watching, maybe guiding. What if the Zetans had given us fire? What if they'd shown early humans how to smelt metal, how to plant crops, how to organize into cities and nations and empires? What if every advancement that led us from caves to nuclear weapons had been a deliberate step in their experiment? They hadn't just observed our evolution, they'd directed it. We thought we'd climbed from primitive hunters to spacefaring civilization through our own ingenuity. But what if we'd been following a curriculum designed by an alien intelligence? What if every invention, every discovery, every breakthrough had been exactly what the Zetans wanted us to achieve? The Death Ray Control Center had viewing screens showing Earth in real time. I stood there looking down at the Capitol wasteland, at the ruins of Washington, D.C., still glowing with radiation 200 years after the bombs fell. I could see the crater where the White House had been, the shattered remains of the Washington Monument, the irradiated Potomac River cutting through the devastation like a poisoned artery. This was what the Zetans had created. This was their garden, their laboratory, their proof of concept, and we were still here, still surviving, still adapting, exactly as they'd predicted. The wasteland hadn't killed humanity, it had changed us, ghouls who could survive for centuries, their bodies transformed by radiation. Super mutants, products of forced evolutionary virus exposure, stronger and more durable than baseline humans. New factions rising from the ashes, the Brotherhood of Steel, the Enclave, the New California Republic, Caesar's Legion. Every one of them a different response to the post-nuclear world, a different strategy for survival. The Zetans were still watching, still recording, still learning. Sally showed me the ship's trajectory data. Mothership Zeta had been in continuous orbit around Earth for over 400 years, never landing, never leaving, just watching. The ship's power systems were designed to operate for millennia. The Zetans weren't planning to leave. They were planning to stay and observe humanity's long-term adaptation to the wasteland they'd helped create. We were an ongoing experiment, and the Great War had just been the beginning of a much longer study. I found personnel logs indicating the crew complement of Mothership Zeta, over 300 Zetan scientists, soldiers, and support staff, but Only one ship was in orbit. Sally's hacking revealed there had been a second mothership, an identical vessel monitoring the other side of the planet. Past tense. The second ship had departed Earth's orbit in 2068, 9 years before the Great War, heading back to wherever the Zetans called home. Why? The logs indicated it was carrying preliminary findings and successful genetic samples. The Zetans had already collected enough data to satisfy their initial research goals. They'd proven humans would destroy themselves given the right circumstances. Everything after 2068 was just confirmation, detailed observation of the aftermath, documentation of how a species recovers from self-inflicted extinction, or doesn't recover. The data suggested the Zetans were running multiple scenarios simultaneously. Some vaults had been designed to fail catastrophically, killing their inhabitants, and providing data on complete societal collapse. Others had been designed to succeed, creating pockets of preserved pre-war civilization that could be studied in isolation. Still others had been given specific experimental parameters, testing everything from authoritarian control to democratic chaos, from genetic purity to forced integration of surface dwellers. Every vault was a petri dish, every survivor was a test subject, and the Enclave, with their access to Vault Tec's master records, had been coordinating with the Zetans the entire time. I found the smoking gun in a sealed data archive, heavily encrypted communications between Mothership Zeta and a terrestrial base designated Site R. Site R was Raven Rock, the Enclave's primary command bunker. The communications dated back to 2041, over 30 years before the Great War. The Enclave and the Zetans had been in direct contact for decades, coordinating research efforts, sharing technology, planning for the post-nuclear world. The Enclave had known the bombs were coming because they'd helped ensure the bombs would come. In exchange, the Zetans had given them advanced technology, power armor schematics, energy weapon designs, everything the Enclave needed to survive and dominate in the wasteland. It was a partnership built on mutual benefit and shared contempt for human life. The Zetans got their experiment. The Enclave got to position themselves as the rightful inheritors of America, the chosen few who'd ride out the apocalypse and emerge as gods among the survivors. Both parties had sacrificed billions of lives to achieve their goals. And both parties were still operating, still pursuing their agendas, still treating humanity as something to be controlled rather than respected. Paulson had been listening to my discoveries with increasing fury. He'd lost everything to these creatures, his family, his time, his entire world. When I showed him the evidence that the Great War had been deliberately engineered, something broke inside him. He grabbed a Zetan weapon, one of their powerful alien atomizers, and said he was going to kill every alien on this ship, even if it meant dying in the attempt. I couldn't blame him. Part of me wanted to do the same. But Sally had a better idea. She'd been studying the ship's weapon systems, learning how they operated, and she'd discovered something the Zetans probably didn't want us to know. The death ray could be manually targeted. We could aim it at any point on Earth and fire. Sally suggested we could use it to destroy Raven Rock, to eliminate the Enclave's command structure, to cut off the head of the organization that had conspired with the aliens to murder our species. It was tempting. God, it was tempting, but I said no, because using the death ray would make us exactly what the Zetans thought we were: violent, self-destructive, willing to kill to achieve our goals. We'd be proving their thesis, confirming their research, validating everything they'd done to us. The only way to truly beat them was to refuse to play their game, to survive without becoming monsters, to rebuild without repeating the mistakes that had led to the Great War. Before we could debate it further, alarms started blaring throughout the ship. Another mothership was approaching, the second vessel returning from wherever it had gone. Sally pulled up the tactical display showing 2 massive saucers on an intercept course. The second mothership was nearly identical to Zeta, bristling with weapons, shields already charging. They were going to attack us, either to reclaim their ship or to destroy it to prevent us from escaping with what we knew. We ran for the bridge, fighting through waves of aliens who'd suddenly become even more aggressive. They knew we'd discovered their secrets. They knew we understood what they'd done, and they couldn't allow that information to return to Earth. We were supposed to be specimens, not witnesses. We were supposed to remain ignorant, to accept our fate without understanding the forces that had shaped it. The bridge was a massive circular chamber with viewports showing space in all directions, control consoles wrapped around the perimeter, all displaying readouts in the alien language that Sally had learned to interpret. She jumped into what looked like the captain's chair, her small hands flying over controls designed for beings twice her size. Elliott and Soma took positions at weapons stations. Paulson grabbed a manual targeting system for the death ray. Toshiro stood ready with his sword, knowing it was useless against the ship but refusing to be unarmed. The second mothership opened fire first, green energy beams lancing across the void and slamming into Zeta's shields. The ship shuddered under the impact. Sally returned fire, the death ray charging and releasing a concentrated beam that struck the enemy vessel's shields. It was like watching two ancient gods battle among the stars, weapons that could destroy planets exchanging fire, while we tiny humans clung to our stolen ship and prayed we'd survive. The battle lasted hours. Both ships had powerful shields that could absorb tremendous punishment. Both ships had death rays capable of obliterating continents. We fired. They fired. Shields degraded, recharged, degraded again. Alien boarding parties teleported onto Zeta, trying to retake the bridge. We fought them off in brutal close-quarters combat. Paulson's ancient revolver firing alongside Elliott's alien disintegrator, Toshiro's sword cutting through green flesh, Soma's technical expertise keeping our shields operational. I manned a weapons console I barely understood, following Sally's shouted instructions, routing power, targeting systems, firing when she said fire, stopping when she said stop. It was chaos. It was terror. It was the most alive I'd felt since being abducted, because for the first time since learning the truth about the Great War, I wasn't a victim or a specimen or a test subject. I was fighting back. We all were. The second mothership's shields finally failed. Sally didn't hesitate. She fired the death ray at full power, the beam cutting through the enemy ship like a plasma cutter through steel. The vessel broke apart, sections spinning away, atmosphere venting, alien bodies tumbling into the vacuum. Then it exploded, a brief sun blooming in the darkness before fading to nothing. We'd won. We'd actually won, but the victory felt hollow. We'd used their weapon. We'd killed hundreds of Zetans. We'd proven we were exactly as violent and destructive as they'd always believed. Sally looked at me with those ancient eyes in that young face and said something I'll never forget. She said, "We're not specimens anymore. We're survivors, and that means doing whatever it takes. If you had the power to destroy your enemy, but doing so would prove they were right about you all along, would you still pull the trigger?" The debris from the destroyed mothership floated past our viewports like a metal asteroid field. Sally initiated automated repair protocols for Zeta's damaged sections while the rest of us just stood there, processing what we'd done. We'd destroyed an entire ship full of living beings. Maybe they were monsters who'd tortured and killed humans for centuries. Maybe they deserved it, but we'd still become killers ourselves, and that weight settled on my shoulders like a suit of power armor made of guilt. Elliott broke the silence first. He'd found something on the tactical console, more ships approaching from deeper in the solar system. Not motherships, smaller vessels, scout craft maybe, responding to the distress signal the second mothership had transmitted before we destroyed it. We had maybe 6 hours before they arrived, 6 hours to decide what to do with Zeta, with the evidence we'd collected, with the knowledge that could shatter everything the wasteland believed about itself. Soma suggested we take the ship to Earth, land it somewhere visible, force the world to confront the truth about alien manipulation. She wanted to broadcast everything we'd learned, to expose the Enclave's cooperation with the Zetans, to reveal that the Great War had been engineered rather than accidental. She thought humanity deserved to know. Part of me agreed with her. The truth should matter, shouldn't it? People should understand that we'd been puppets dancing on alien strings for centuries, but Paulson disagreed. He'd seen what the truth had done to Quaere Verum. They'd learned about the alien conspiracy, tried to expose it, and been systematically murdered for their trouble. He said the truth was a weapon that killed anyone who wielded it. He said the wasteland was fragile enough without destroying the last shreds of meaning people had built from the ruins. If we told them the Great War was engineered, if we revealed that humanity's greatest tragedy was just an alien experiment, what would they have left? What reason would anyone have to rebuild, to try, to hope? Toshiro didn't speak English, but Sally translated his gestures. He wanted to destroy the ship, to erase all evidence of what we'd learned, to sink this knowledge so deep it could never surface. He came from a culture that valued honor and self-determination. The idea that his entire civilization, that every samurai who'd ever lived and died by the code of Bushido, had been observed and cataloged by alien scientists like insects in a jar, it violated something fundamental in his worldview. Better to destroy the truth than live with that shame. Sally just looked at me and asked what I thought. This little girl who'd been 10 years old for 2 centuries, who'd learned to hack alien computers and speak their language and survive in a metal prison orbiting the planet she'd been stolen from. She'd spent longer thinking about this question than any of us. What do you do with truth that destroys meaning? What do you do with knowledge that invalidates everything humanity thought it knew about itself? I walked to the viewport and looked down at Earth. The sun was rising over the eastern seaboard, light creeping across the wasteland like hope spreading through darkness. I could see the capital wasteland, the ruins I'd called home for my entire adult life. Megaton with its atomic bomb church, Rivet City and its beached aircraft carrier, the citadel where the Brotherhood of Steel fought to preserve pre-war technology, Canterbury Commons, where traders gathered to exchange goods and stories, all of it built by people who thought they were recovering from humanity's greatest mistake, who believed the Great War had been a failure of human wisdom rather than an engineered catastrophe. And I realized something that made all our debate irrelevant. It didn't matter whether the Great War had been accidental or deliberate. It didn't matter whether the Zetans had manipulated us or we destroyed ourselves. What mattered was what we did next. The wasteland existed. The radiation was real. The struggle to survive was genuine. The communities people had built, the families they'd formed, the hope they'd maintained through 200 years of darkness, none of that was invalidated by alien interference. We were still us, even if we'd been observed. We were still human, even if we'd been cataloged. The Zetans had conducted their experiment. They'd engineered the conditions for the Great War, pushed us towards self-destruction, documented our response to nuclear holocaust. But they'd made one critical miscalculation. They'd assumed that destroying our civilization would destroy us. They'd thought that nuclear fire would either exterminate humanity or reduce us to primitive scavengers who'd eventually die out. They hadn't predicted the Brotherhood of Steel rising from military remnants to preserve technology. They hadn't predicted the new California Republic forming a democratic government from scattered survivors. They hadn't predicted ghouls adapting to radiation and living for centuries. They hadn't predicted super mutants developing their own culture and communities. We'd surprised them. We'd survived in ways they hadn't anticipated. And that survival, that adaptability, that stubborn refusal to die even when every rational prediction said we should, that was more human than anything the Zetans could have engineered. They'd created the wasteland thinking it would be our tomb. Instead, it had become our crucible. We'd been forged in nuclear fire and emerged stronger, stranger, more diverse than the pre-war civilization had ever been. I told the others my decision. We weren't going to land the ship on Earth. We weren't going to broadcast what we'd learned. And we weren't going to destroy the evidence. Instead, we were going to hide it. Sally could encrypt the data, bury it in systems so deep and protected that only someone with her level of expertise could ever access it. We'd create a dead man's switch, a trigger that would release everything if the Zetans ever tried something like the Great War again. The information would be preserved but contained, a nuclear deterrent made of truth instead of uranium. As for the ship itself, Sally said she could program it to maintain orbit indefinitely, to continue monitoring Earth, but without any alien crew to interpret the data. Zeta would become a ghost ship, a monument to what had been done to us and a warning to any other Zetans who thought about interfering. We'd leave a message in their systems, translated into their language, making it clear that humanity knew about them now. We knew what they'd done, and if they ever tried it again, we'd make sure every human on Earth learned the truth. We'd weaponize the secret, turn it into insurance, use their own desire for discretion against them. The Zetans wanted to observe without being observed. They wanted to manipulate without being exposed. So, we'd threaten them with exposure, with revelation, with the possibility that their carefully controlled experiment would be contaminated by its subjects understanding they were subjects. Sally started the encryption process, building digital vaults within vaults, creating a data structure so complex that even she admitted she might not be able to crack it without the specific access codes. Elliott helped her, his medical training giving him an understanding of information systems that translated surprisingly well to alien computers. Soma worked on the ship's autonomous protocols, programming Zeta to continue its orbit and observations without crew intervention. Paulson and Toshiro prepared a teleportation beacon we'd plant on Earth, a way for us to return if we ever needed access to the ship again. I recorded a message for any future humans who might find their way aboard Zeta. I explained what we'd learned, what the Zetans had done, how the Great War had been engineered. But I also explained why we'd chosen to hide this information rather than reveal it. I talked about meaning and purpose and the fragile hope that kept the wasteland alive. I said that sometimes the truth matters less than what people do with what they believe. I said that humanity had survived not because we understood our circumstances, but because we refused to surrender to them. The recording felt inadequate, even as I made it. How do you summarize something like this? How do you explain that your entire species has been a science experiment for centuries and that the knowledge changes nothing and everything simultaneously? I did my best. I talked for hours, documenting everything we'd found, every piece of evidence, every horrible revelation. And then I encrypted it alongside Sally's data dump, sealed behind digital locks that would take decades to crack. Before we left Zeta, I visited the cryo chambers one last time, rows and rows of frozen humans stretching back through history. The samurai's empty pod, the cowboy's empty pod, Elliott's empty pod, but hundreds of others still occupied, still preserved, still waiting, people from every era of human civilization, all stolen by the Zetans, all cataloged and stored like books in a library. I wanted to free them. I wanted to wake them all up and bring them home to Earth. But Sally explained that most of them wouldn't survive the awakening process. The cryo-technology was alien, unstable, designed for Zetan physiology, and only partially compatible with humans. We'd been lucky that our group had survived the thawing without brain damage or system failure. Trying to revive hundreds of frozen people would likely kill most of them. The kindest thing we could do was leave them sleeping, preserved in their pods, alive but unconscious, until maybe someday humanity developed the technology to safely wake them. It felt like abandoning them. It felt like failure. But Sally was right. We couldn't save everyone. We could barely save ourselves. So we left them there, those frozen specimens from throughout history, still suspended in their alien prison, still waiting for a rescue that might never come. I made a note in my encrypted recording about their location, about the possibility of future recovery. It was all I could offer them. The teleportation matrix activated, the same technology that had brought us aboard now sending us back to Earth. We materialized near the crashed recon craft where I'd first been abducted. The wasteland exactly as I'd left it. Springvale's ruins stretched before us, irradiated and desolate and beautiful in its own terrible way. The sky was the familiar sickly yellow of rad storms approaching. The air tasted like rust and decay. It was home. Sally vanished almost immediately, slipping away into the ruins before anyone could stop her. She'd spent 200 years aboard Zeta. Maybe she needed time alone to process being back on Earth. Or maybe she just didn't want to face what came next, the questions, the explanations, the impossible task of integrating back into a world she'd left as a child and returned to as something else entirely. Soma headed west, toward wherever she'd come from originally. She said her people would be worried, that she'd been gone too long, that she had her own wasteland to return to. We exchanged frequencies for radio contact, promised to stay in touch, knowing we probably wouldn't. Some experiences are too heavy to share. Some knowledge creates distance rather than connection. Elliott wanted to go to the Citadel to see if the Brotherhood of Steel had any records of his unit, any information about what had happened to the 108th Infantry Battalion. I told him I'd put in a word with Elder Lyons, that they'd probably welcome a pre-war military medic with advanced training. He seemed grateful for the direction, for something to focus on besides the enormity of what we'd learned. Paulson and Toshiro stayed together. They couldn't communicate verbally, but they'd developed a bond during our escape from Zeta. Two warriors from different centuries, both displaced in time, both robbed of everything they'd known. Paulson said something about heading south, about looking for a place where a cowboy and a samurai might find work. I didn't ask what kind of work. I figured the wasteland had plenty of use for men who were good at killing. That left me alone with my knowledge and my guilt and my understanding that I could never tell anyone the full truth of what I'd learned. I returned to Megaton, to my house near the atomic bomb, to my life as a wasteland scavenger. People asked where I'd been. I said I'd gotten lost in the metro tunnels and it had taken weeks to find my way out. Nobody questioned it. In the wasteland, stranger things happened every day. But I couldn't forget. I couldn't unknow what the Zetans had done. I couldn't erase the memory of standing on their ship looking down at Earth while they explained how they'd engineered our destruction. So I started writing. I started recording. I started documenting everything I could remember, creating this confession you're listening to now, leaving evidence of what happened to me and what I learned. I am specimen 2281-H. I am Marcus Reeves. I am a vault dweller who escaped into the wasteland and was abducted by aliens and discovered that humanity's greatest tragedy was an experiment conducted by an extraterrestrial intelligence. I am a man who learned the truth and chose to hide it because sometimes hope matters more than honesty, and I am telling you this now, whoever you are, whenever you are, because I need someone to know. I need someone to understand that we were never alone and never free, but also that it doesn't matter. The Zetans thought they controlled us, thought they could predict our behavior, thought they could engineer our extinction and document our dying gasps. They were wrong. We survived. We adapted. We built new lives from the radioactive rubble of the old world. Every settlement in the wasteland, every trader route, every farm scratching crops from irradiated soil, every child born into this toxic world and choosing to keep living anyway, all of it is proof that the Zetans failed. They created the worst possible conditions for human survival, and we survived anyway. They pushed us to extinction, and we refused to go extinct. They treated us like specimens, and we became something they never predicted. Survivors who made meaning from meaninglessness, who found hope in hopelessness, who looked at a dead world and decided to make it live again. The Great War happened. The bombs fell. The world died. But we didn't. And that's the only truth that matters. Not who pushed the button or why. Not which government conspired with which alien species. Not whether our history was manipulated or our evolution was guided. What matters is that we're still here. We're still human. We're still fighting. If this confession meant something to you, leave a like. It's the only way I know you liked the video. I don't know if anyone will ever hear this recording. I don't know if the truth I'm hiding will stay hidden or eventually come to light. I don't know if the Zetans are still watching us from orbit, still documenting our recovery, still waiting to see if we'll destroy ourselves again. But I know this. We are not specimens. We are not subjects in someone else's experiment. We are human beings, flawed and violent and beautiful and stubborn and absolutely refusing to disappear just because some alien intelligence decided we should. The wasteland is ours, the future is ours, and no matter what the Zetans did to create this world, what we do with it is entirely up to us. My name is Marcus Reeves. I escaped Mothership Zeta. I learned the truth about the Great War, and I'm choosing to let humanity write its own ending, free from the knowledge that might destroy the hope we need to survive. The Zetans wanted to study us. Let them watch as we prove day after day, year after year, century after century, that we are more than they ever understood. We are survivors, we are human, and we will not be filed away and forgotten. This is my confession. This is my warning. This is my hope. The aliens are real. They're watching. They've always been watching, but they don't control us. They never did. They only thought they did. And that difference between being controlled and believing you're controlled, that difference is everything. The wasteland awaits. The future is unwritten, and somewhere up there, in a ghost ship orbiting our poisoned world, the Zetans are still recording, still observing, still trying to understand the species that refused to die when they were supposed to. Let them watch. Let them learn. Let them realize that humanity is not a problem to be solved or an experiment to be concluded. We are a force of nature, chaotic and unpredictable and absolutely unstoppable. Welcome to the wasteland. Welcome to Earth. Welcome to the garden where the Zetans tried to grow extinction and accidentally cultivated resistance instead. We are the crops that refused to be harvested. We are the specimens that broke free. We are humanity, 200 years after the end of the world, still here, still fighting, still surviving. And we are just getting started. Knowing that speaking the truth could destroy hope, but remaining silent makes you complicit in a lie. Which would you choose for the people you're trying to protect?